Welcome to ManaSota-88's program on the environment. Tonight we're very fortunate in having Mr. Bruce Pitzer, a member of the Florida Bar and an attorney who has done some pro bono work for ManaSota-88 with us, and we're going to discuss, to begin with, a zoning disclosure law and why, or rule, and why it has been so difficult for ManaSota-88 to get this on the county books. Bruce, proceed. If you don't mind, tell us what this is, first of all.
Okay, thank you, Gloria. I'm glad to be here. What the state needs, I think, are 25,000 more people like you that are as dedicated as you have been and as effective as you have been in helping preserve our environment. But the corporations heretofore and today in Manatee County and Sarasota County can hire an agent to go before a zoning board and get a variance, more density than is permitted under the law, or a development that requires a special impacts to the environment, without having to disclose who those persons are in that corporation. Whereas a private person has to list their name, if they have a lessee, or if the land is under contract. All that information must be given to the zoning board, but not a corporation. And that is what we feel should be changed.
And why do you suppose that both Sarasota and Manatee counties have been so eager not to change this?
May I read you something
Certainly.
I saw this column the other day, and I won't tell you what paper this is from, but it opens with this statement. It's a Florida newspaper. Everybody knows the Metro Commission is a charade. Everybody knows the majority is controlled by developers, special interests, and a handful of lobbyists. Everybody knows what goes on. Now this, in fact, is Carl Hyacin, who is a columnist for the Miami Herald, and this appeared in the May 7th edition of this newspaper. But when I read that, I thought, gee, which paper am I reading here? And I realized at the time then it was an out-of-town paper. But I don't know if that answers your question, but I think we all know what goes on. If you go to a commission hearing, you see the boys in the pinstripe suits nodding to the commissioners, and they generally get their way. And all we're saying is there is no right of privacy, as some of the people claim, when you're wanting a variance. Now, zoning is a type of legislation. It's a zoning board is in effect making laws. When they say, okay, here's the zoning code, but we're going to give you an exception, a variance. That's like a special bill going through the legislature. And if you have a special bill in the legislature and people don't even know who the sponsors are, that just ain't right.
Well, I totally agree, and I do think it's a little absurd, as you said, that if you're a renter, you have to disclose who you are. If you're a private person, you do, and yet we have no idea why a piece of property is being rezoned. I mean, who's behind it and what they stand to profit on this thing.
And there's the danger that you could have a person in the planning and zoning department that could be a minority stockholder in that corporation that's going to get this variance. And that zoning department employee may be the person assigned to decide whether or not the zoning, it should be approved. And that recommendation is weighed heavily by that zoning board. So you have a lot of people that are involved that are county officials or city officials, if it's a city zoning, and the public has a right to know. There's no right of privacy when you want a special exception to zoning, and the public has a right to know.
Right, and I think the thing that got us interested in this actually was what happened over in Miami. Maybe you can tell us about that.
Well, Miami did pass a disclosure ordinance, and it passed it because there was an example of self-dealing by an elected official that on a piece of property that came before the zoning board. And it's because of that he was going to profit that the county finally decided to pass it. And it's on the books now, and it requires you, if you're going to apply for an exception, a variance or an exception, to list your interest in the corporation. If you're a stockholder in the corporation, you must list that interest.
Well, I think, too, in a county north of us, that there was someone in the planning department who, as you said, was reviewing a plan and making the recommendations. And as I recall, the rezone meant about $76,000 to them. So it can be a very lucrative situation when your salary is considerably less.
Well, you might have some developer who's in the past been prosecuted for cutting mangroves. And I think that the citizens have a right to know if this man is again coming in requesting a special exception, a variance, a special bill in effect, for another development of his, and not hide behind a land agent as they now are able to do.
Well, I totally agree. And I think, too, when people buy a piece of property, very often they anticipate the zoning staying the same.
Right.
And you really need to know who this land is being rezoned for and why are they doing something that may adversely impact the value of your property and your life.
The objections raised by county attorneys that have been raised in Sarasota, for example, and I'm sure the same argument was made in Manatee County when this was, you brought this before them.
No, I've never had the privilege. They assured me it would come up during the Land Development Code proceedings, and all I got was the thing I showed you tonight that said, no, that's out.
Okay. Well, they raised the argument that there's a constitutional right to privacy. And there is a constitutional right to privacy, as we all know from the pros and cons of the Roe v. Wade decision. But that right deals with your marriage, procreation, and those kind of private rights. Really, this whole thing about privacy is the right to be let alone by your government. And those rights are much different than a corporation that wants a special exception, in effect a special bill, to develop land that can affect all of us. Can affect the traffic, can affect the pollution, can affect the schools, can affect all of us. And that has nothing to do with a right to be let alone by your government. They're trying to use government to fashion something for their own private gain. And all we're saying is, we'd like to know who you are. A little sunshine, government in the sunshine. And let's put a little sunshine on these applications that come in before zoning boards. And some zoning boards, that's it. It doesn't go to the commission after that for approval. Like on Longboat Key, once they agree to a variance, they get it. In most counties, it still goes before the commission to be approved.
Right. Well, I do think that in this instance, it certainly makes you think that there's something to hide because it's not that big a deal to disclose who is asking for a rezone and why don't they want us to know. And it's certainly something that we intend to pursue for as long as it takes. So we appreciate the assistance that you've given us, and we'll continue to hope that you can help us about this. How has it worked out in Miami? Have you had a chance to talk to them over there?
Well, I tried to call them. I couldn't reach them. But there's been no, they all say, well, there's some question about the constitutionality of this. But it hasn't been overturned by the courts. I know that. It's been on the books now for some time. It wasn't easy to get it on the books because if there's a county where the developers have had their way, it's Dade County. As Carl Hyacin in this article states, everybody knows the Metro Commission is a charade. And so it's on the books there now. With what's left of Dade County, at least now they'll know something about who these people are, and they can't hide behind a straw man when they come in and want some special bill, in effect. A variance.
Right. Well, Jan Platt, one of the best commissioners, or the best commissioner in Hillsborough County, also tried to get a similar ordinance passed and was unsuccessful. But again, I think if Sarasota and Manatee and Hillsborough people persist, that ultimately we will get this. And it is a matter of principle and our right to know when somebody asks for a special change that's going to affect our lives.
The Supreme Court of the United States has used various tests in determining zoning is a balancing of private property rights with the public welfare. And the Supreme Court feels that private rights have to give it sometimes under the police powers, and that zoning is under the police power. Police power not only covers the stench of civilization, the garbage collection, but also the Supreme Court says people have a right to a peaceful environment. In 1974, the United States Supreme Court says they have a right to a peaceful environment. And what we're saying is what the Supreme Court has said, we just want, in trying to maintain what we can left of this peaceful environment, we'd like to know who you are and what affiliations you have with other people in government or in past developments as to how you've done and dealt with that before you come in and ask this zoning board to let you have another special exception.
Yeah, and again, I think that this would be good insofar as not putting staff in the unfortunate position of being offered a profit for an appropriate decision regarding some of these rezone applications, or at least if it were a sincere ownership situation, the person on county staff should have no objection to their being known.
Well, I think the application should be like a public record. You know, we have the Public Records Act that gives us private citizens the right to go and see zoning applications, at least to see what's on them, except that now there's not enough on them. But this should be a part of that Public Records Act. It should be, in effect, you're coming and asking us for something special.
Well, when we come back, I think we're about ready to break here. We'll discuss this a little more and then get into the assault that's being made on the Growth Management Act in the legislature.
Okay.
We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to ManaSota-88's program on the environment, and we're with our guest, Bruce Pitzer, who's explaining to us about the importance of a zoning disclosure ordinance and the fact that we've been unable to get one in both Manatee and Sarasota counties. Bruce, would you like to go over this one more time and tell people what they might do to help us on this?
Okay, Gloria, I think an example is the first couple of paragraphs of the one that was passed in Dade County. And it merely says all requests for a boundary change in the zoning regulations, and special exceptions or unusual uses and variances, the applicant must state, if it's a corporation, trust, or partnership, what the interests are. And there's a form attached where they must show those interests in that corporation, partnership, or trust. All we're asking is that when somebody comes in and wants a variance, which is, you know, they can go and take the land as it is without requiring a variance and build on it whatever they want. But if they want a change that creates more density, creates more problems than the master plan has dictated in the zoning code, then we as citizens should be entitled to know who these people are in this corporation and, you know, what their past is, what their associations are with local officials. And that shouldn't be, you know, that should be, there shouldn't be any argument about this.
Well, this is what's bothered me, that there is such an argument, and then you have to say why, and you think you know, but nevertheless, as you say, we'll persist with this. And how do you, what would you suggest members of our audience that think as we do on this should do?
I think they should contact their county commissioners and their zoning board and request that corporations, partnerships, and trusts be required to disclose what those people are that hold any interest over 10 or 15% in the corporations. Who they are, that's all. You know, we're not trying to go into their private lives, but they're coming and wanting something from us, from the community, and to that extent we want to just ask them to stand up and be counted.
Well, I think another example to point out how this goes is in Charlotte County, a building was actually moved, a county building, a wetland was filled, and a number of other very odd things, and it turned out that one of the co-owners, eventually it turned out, was in the planning department. So this would help to avoid anything like that if it should arise. We were talking too earlier about the Growth Management Act and the assaults that are currently in process. Could you tell us a little bit about what you think on this?
Well, as you know, in Sarasota County, they're trying to get on, a group is trying to get on the ballot a moratorium, a 2-year moratorium, and there's two groups at odds over this, and one is called the Concerned Citizens, and the moratorium forces are called GEO, I believe, and the Concerned Citizens and groups allied with them, the developers, have all said, Let's let the laws on the books work rather than make any changes. Now, what they're referring to is the Growth Management Act, or APOXI, in Sarasota County, and you have a
Manatee County Comprehensive Plan.
Comprehensive plan.
Right.
And the question is, how firm are these laws that have been passed and called comprehensive plans, or APOXI, in Sarasota County? Well, today's St. Petersburg Times editorial page, lead editorial, is about attempts in the present legislature to amend the 1985 Growth Management Act. And I'd just like to read one paragraph from this, giving credit to the editorial writer of the St. Petersburg Times, today's edition. And this refers to Representative Fred Jones' Community Affairs Committee. In Jones' Community Affairs Committee, the 1985 Growth Management Act became a dartboard for development. Thwack. Open up rural areas to satellite cities, shopping strips, and more urban sprawl. Thwack. Restrict citizen enforcement of growth laws. Citizen enforcement of growth laws, such as your organization has been able to do successfully in certain instances where you've been able to move in and get something done through the courts. Thwack. Frustrate cities that want to increase impact fees on development. And Sarasota, for example, the impact fees are not nearly high enough.
They're certainly not in Manatee County either.
Thwack. Exempt large developments from growth management. Thwack. Open up the state's growth regulation to administrative appeal. These are all attempts presently going on in this legislature to limit the effectiveness of the Growth Management Act. So just because we have a comprehensive plan in place in both counties, that doesn't mean it won't be changed. And I think this is obviously an attempt to water it down and to get done what's been done for the last 100 years in this state, and that's to slowly make it into one large parking lot.
Unfortunately, I think you're right. And while I had hoped that the Growth Management Act might make it through this session, and still feel it might, I think they're just softening us up for next year after the election's over, and I fully expect it to be drastically weakened if it survives this year.
Gloria, there is a book that I'm not an agent for, have no interest in, but I've found is marvelous reading for anybody that's interested in the history of Florida and the effects of man on this state in the last 100 years. And the title of this book is Some Kind of Paradise, A Chronicle of Man and the Land in Florida by Mark Durr. The publisher is Morrow and Company. And it's I bought it at Charlie's News in Sarasota a few weeks ago. It's a wonderful book. It's got photographs. For instance, a photograph shows the Walt Disney property in 1967 before the development and then during the development. But he goes back over the last 100 years and shows the depredations that have occurred in this state. They tried to drain the Everglades before it became a park, and now the what's happening down there is terrible. The sugar industry is we could have a program just about the sugar industry.
Right, and I think we should note that the federal government subsidizes this.
Absolutely.
And makes it possible for them to exist.
Absolutely. Porter Goss claims to be an environmental congressman, but he's not up there trying to do anything about that sugar subsidy, and those sugar plantations do more with eutrophication and runoff into the Everglades to hurt the Everglades than anything else, that and the dairy farms. But yet we're supporting sugar with 7 cents a pound. I think the international price is 14 and the domestic price with the support is 21 cents. And if you so the public is supporting the destruction of the Everglades through sugar cane on the north side of the Everglades. And it's those kinds of things that Mr. Durr refers to. It's been going on for 100 years that Carl Hyacin talks about today in Miami. And it's really, you're fighting a rearguard action. That's why the state needs so many more people like you with your dedication and ability. But, even asking a county commission, can't we know who this person is that wants this special exception? And they say no. How can they? Well, you know, if you know the history of the state, as Mark Durr does, and it's a very well-documented book, you can see that it's been going on for 100 years, and what should we do, throw our hands up, or try to get involved? And we need to get involved and try to do something to at least slow it down.
Well, I think that's very true, and as you know from being here before and coming back again, you can see all the changes that have transpired. But I do believe the west coast of Florida still has some hope, and I agree with you. We just have to get busy and make our elected officials accountable, if it's even possible, accountable to the public.
Well, my father was born here on the East Coast, New Smyrna, and I've been coming down since I was a kid. My son was born in Homestead when I was stationed there in the Air Force, and I used to practice law in Venice, but I've been gone from the state for quite a number of years. But I have a little airplane, and I fly it occasionally up along the west coast, north of Tampa. And once you get up there beyond Crystal River, it is the way the state used to be. I took some people up to the St. Marks River area in a plane, my plane not long ago. And I remarked to them, I said, you know, the developers can't do much with this. There's no beaches there. It's great fishing country. But if you get up there and you look, there's still parts of the state, yes. And if you get down to Everglades City and below there, below Marco Island, you can see from the air that there's still something to fight for. It's pretty hard to see that from 41, but if you get up in a plane, yes, you're right. There is still some out there that is worth protecting.
Right, and I was looking at some before and after pictures of one of our most productive estuary areas in Manatee County, and of course that's the Port Manatee area. And it was very interesting to look at the aerials that were taken in 1950 and compare them to 1988. However, there's still a lot to be saved there. And again, if we can keep some of these rezone applications from being approved,
right,
and some of the changes taking place in that area that shouldn't, we at least can work together to preserve that area.
If you can just stop the rezoning, and that's what we're talking about, at least let us know who you are when you want rezoning. It's just such a little bit that we're asking for on this one issue, and yet it meets with resistance in both counties. They come up with legal opinions and cite something to do with totally off the wall. Corporations have no right to privacy, and they're not the same as people. They don't have a right to privacy, and they're asking us to give them a special bill. In effect, rezoning is in effect a special piece of legislation, and they have no right to do that without us knowing who they are.
Yeah, and as I pointed out, I think the interesting part is the resistance we're running into with this effort, and as I said, we're going to persist, but you can see, obviously, that some people perceive this as a danger to their fortune-gathering abilities.
Right. Well, one commissioner in Sarasota County says, I don't want to know who it is that's coming before me. Well, if it's a private person, he knows, but apparently a corporation, is that to say that he would be partial if he knew his friends were in it? Well, he should step down in that case. He shouldn't be voting on the matter. I mean, that's not an argument. We're entitled to know who these people are, but it's hard to get it done, and we need help. And if people would bring this up to their representatives and their commissioners and say, look, on these rezonings, where they want to build these huge projects and they want these increased densities, we want to know who these people are. That's all we're asking.
Well, I think of the wide disparity in the treatment of people, and when an individual goes in to have something done, it's so
That's
terribly
right.
difficult. But when this unknown corporation
That's right.
goes in, it seems to be very easy. We've got about 45 seconds left here. Have you got any final words on this issue?
Well, I think we've pretty well covered it, Gloria. It's the men in the pinstripe suits. As you say, it's so easy when they go in, because there are people that are up there constantly, these agents. I can think of a few names in Sarasota.
There's the same sort of cast of players here, too, in the main. And we're out of time, and I want to thank you, Bruce, very much for being with us tonight, and we look forward to your coming back, and we appreciate your generosity in helping ManaSota-88.
All right.
Good night. We'll see you next week.